Right, this is interesting. I'm going to go into a bit of detail in Sheffield United, but actually, all Premier League fans, this is a video for you. I want to do a bit of a survey. I want to get your take on several different questions. Now, first things first, of course, Heckingbottom has gone. Chris Wilder is making his way back into this Sheffield United fold, and that's an interesting one because I did an interview with Chris Wilder about a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. And he was an amazing person, a very, very interesting person. And I'll let you know my thoughts on Chris Wilder, because I think this goes two ways. But anyway, first things first, the narrative. So the narrative, as you know, is sort of an element of the JLA channel. We've got a Discord server. There's a link to that in the description below. There's 20 different channels. All Premier League clubs, get involved with the Discord server, because I will lean on you guys when I need that authentic take on your club. So with that in mind, your average bloke is going to give his thoughts on Heckingbottom, and then we're going to have a chat after.
The absolute worst thing has been the performances from our players. They're not fighting, they're not working hard enough. Our discipline when things aren't going our way, which is all the time, it seems, has been pitiful. So many stupid bookings, red cards, little sort of scraps that we've started with other players, just totally unnecessarily. It's been embarrassing to watch. But that being said, obviously someone has to take the blame for the performances, the results, and Hecky is the face of all that, and that's why he does have to go. I've never thought he was tactically a great or even like a good manager. I thought he got carried by Ilman and Jai last year. He was just the best player in the Championship. So he just sort of let him get away with poor tactics, and without him, I think he's sort of been exposed for not really having the acumen to manage in the Premier League. In terms of Wilder coming back, I'm not really sure that's going to work either, to be honest. There's an element of never go back. You know, don't sully the memory of yourself. I don't think we're going to stay out no matter what, but I'd rather go down with us properly fighting every week than just sort of slipping out the league almost, just sort of just letting games go by and all this. I think Chris Wilder is going to give us a bit of fight. That's why I'm desperate for this to work out.
So there's a lot of love for Heckingbottom. A lot of love for Heckingbottom. And I think, you know, in the different elements of it, first of all, here's a question for you. When it comes to the summer, now the problem with Ndiaye is something that's really, really hurt Sheffield United. And there is that feeling that Ndiaye was the guy that was going to help keep them up. They brought in Jordan Archer, but overall, the transfer dealings were very disappointing. Key players being sold. You know, if you lose your talisman striker, your talisman person in terms of Billy Sharp, and your best centre midfielder, then life's going to be very, very difficult for you. So the forward planning in the summer was absolutely atrocious, and that leads into a horrible feeling. You have that first game of the season where Chris Basham is playing in centre midfield, and it's not to bash Basham, but it's to put forward the idea that, you know, he shouldn't be playing centre midfield in the opening game of the season. And so that leads us to this idea of, you know, what is the ambition of a club like this? And how do you move forward as a club like this? And when do you reset? And when do you make a real change? Now, my team, QPR, have looked to make that reset right now. And we'll get to Chris Wilder, but I think first things first, if you are a team that wants to stay in the division, one of my big problems is I think I've seen the light with the new QPR manager. Now, we might go down, then this is going to look absolutely horrible. But what I have seen is something very, very interesting, because a massive change of philosophy has happened for QPR here. I've done a video on it if you do want to check that out, because it was a massive, massive risk to bring in a manager that hasn't managed in this league. But we brought in Cifuentes, and what he has done is he has provided us the opportunity to have so much more possession. So if you have a look here, and what I'm going to talk about with Sheffield United and any team, so this is going to be another question. If you want to stay up in the Premier League, do you need the ball? Or do you just need a good defence? What is the key component? Because I think with possession-based football, there is an idea here that I think needs to be explored, especially in the modern game when you can't be that physical, when you've got VAR, you've just got not got the possibility to be as aggressive as you can in the Championship when there isn't VAR. And just broadly, I think football has changed a little bit. And so if you are going to get yourself out of trouble and when you don't have the quality, well, possession is the best way to get your XGA down. So first of all, Sheffield United. This is the possession stats for this season. Now, I've highlighted the one game in which Sheffield United have had 50% or more. Aside from that, not enough, obviously. And under Chris Wilder, we'll have a look at his stats in a second, they had the ball a little bit more and they were a little bit more tenacious as well. And again, they kind of just were brave. If we have a look at QPR, so Fuentes has come in recently, and this isn't to sort of flex, obviously won a couple of games recently, but you can see that Ainsworth left in this game. So all the games prior to that, he was the manager of the team, and he had a very different style. And in that, as you can see, we had the game against Huddersfield, we've got the game against Coventry City, but aside from that, oh, here you go, Swansea City. Aside from that, we didn't have 50% of the ball. And I think the thing to remember here is this: if you don't have the players to totally hurt the opposition, what you need to do is have the ball to get that expected goals against down. So again, if you look, by not having the ball, the expected goals against is very high: 2.92, 1.3, 0.4, 1.5, 2.8, and so on, right? Come back to Sheffield United here under Heckingbottom, and if we can find our way to the expected goals against, you're then going to see the problem that I'm talking about. Because if your expected goals against is high, you need to get lucky to a point to not concede. And so this season, 1.9, 1.4, 3.5, 2.5, 2.1, if it's over 2, you're in trouble. Let me come back to Fuentes. So he came in the Rotherham game. Hang on. So these are the games under Fuentes. Look at their expected goals for. Not great. 0.9, 0.4, 0.6, 2.2, 1.3. But far more importantly here, the possession stats. Look at the jump in possession. Over 50% in 4 of the 5 games. And the expected goals against are all under 1. And that, for me, my eyes recently have been open to that. And if you've got a manager that can provide that for you, you are giving yourself a chance. And that is a problem for Heckingbottom, certainly in the style of play last season as well. It was one where it was, a bit more direct at times, and you can get out of a division that way if you can be dominant. But to go and win games of football, I think you need a different approach. And I think that's the problem with a lot of these teams that go up and go down is, of course, you've got to, what gets you from A to B will not get you from B to C. And the Premier League is so difficult. Let's have a look at Chris Wilder and what he can provide then. Because I did have a quick look as to his stats from that season. And obviously, I think some of these games will obviously be with, because I think Chris Wilder left in January, didn't he? So let's take a few of these off. There is a few more games where they are having the ball a lot more. Next question is, do you go back? Is it a good idea to go back? So the question so far, 1, Heckingbottom should he got the sack. 2, is having possession your only way out of this division? Or sorry, of staying in this division or having success when it comes to a relegation scrap? Because curling into a ball is just not going to do it anymore. Unless, of course, you can win those physical duels. And maybe that's the road for Sheffield United. But I think when you get to the Premier League, that's just not really going to cut it anymore. The third thing, of course, is should you ever go back? Now, Chris Wilder is going back. And there are several examples of a manager going back. Sort of Zinedine Zidane at obviously at the highest level. David Moyes going back to West Ham again has done brilliantly. Ian Holloway came back to QPR and actually did a pretty good job for us. But there's also a lot of managers where it doesn't work. And there's that phrase that, it's pointless going back to a relationship because ultimately you're reading a book that you've already read and you already know the ending. Now, I think that's a touch unfair when it comes to Chris Wilder because the next question is, how important is the culture of a football club? Because I think when it comes to Sheffield United, I went to university in Sheffield, and there is that steeliness to them. It is part of their identity, and the passion that you'll get from someone like Chris Wilder is superb. He obviously cares, but also crucially, I think here, you've got to remember that he will give them the ball. They will attempt to have the ball a lot more than they are with Heckingbottom right now. And that might just give them a chance. Now, obviously, the Premier League is, a difficult league right now to stay in because it feels like those 3 teams are adrift. But the last question I have is, at what point do you put in future planning when you're a team down the bottom? Because this is the only roll of the dice, I think. Because I think with the squad that's there, he still knows a lot of these players. And so he can get in there, get his hands on it. But there's a lot of people that he'll get that buy-in quite quickly. And it's a squad that is a little bit lost in terms of the player profiles that you've got to make big sweeping changes. So if Chris Wilder does want to go possession-based, but go back to that 3 at the back, which he loves a lot of the time, it's there for him. But in terms of an overall reset, if they go down with a terrible amount of points, a horrible feeling around the club, is Chris Wilder the guy to get them back up? I love him as a manager. I would love to see him as a QPR manager, but I'd love him to see him as a QPR manager because he would bring in that freshness. Do Sheffield United to be a team that doesn't bounce up and down like Bournemouth, we're starting to see the fruition of that, Fulham as well, does there have to be that bravery to play to give yourself a chance to stay in the Premier League?